Welcome back to Beagle Eye Vision's Internet. This is my second time recording this episode number 45, Becoming Aware of the Solution. An amazing episode. It's running at 58 minutes, so I can't really talk too much in the intro. We're gonna do some more grinding, and anybody who does this work understands that there are technical difficulties, and unfortunately it is frustrating, but we have to push through, rise above, and just keep on grinding. Just keep on swimming, stay tuned, and stay golden. We're gonna get some more knowledge here, so let's go.
And that's one of the things about religion that we have to remember when we're talking about that makes it such a hot topic issue is because we're talking about law. Who gets to be God? Who gets to be God's deputies? Who is the Most High? Who is the divine authority? It's all about the claim to the Most High. The only way that somebody can be higher than us is if we give away our power. Because there's nobody, we're all equal. But we're not equal in our knowledge, so ultimately I think it does have to be a hierarchy, but it has to be a cooperative hierarchy like a bee colony. It's about what our value system is, what we care about.
Hello, Hive Mind. Today is Tuesday, June 8th, 2021. I'm your host, Nate Cap. Welcome to the 45th CubbyWhole podcast, where important topics are unveiled, discussed, and tested. Our website is CubbyWhole.com. That's CubbyWhole.com. Thank you for joining. And just real quick, I'd like to say that this show may be sporadic over the next few months as I'll be relocating my home, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with how much energy and time that can take. I'll try to get some shows from Douglas and Brandon in the meantime, but after I get settled in, I'll be back on more consistently. There's so much more to cover, very important topics. So be on the lookout for future shows. I'll be sharing slides today, so make sure to go to show 45 on the podcast page of the CubbyWhole website to be able to follow along. There's some really important slides to make sure that we look through in order to understand what I will be covering. So today I'm going to cover the last method of manipulation, which is chaos sorcery, or you can call it problem, reaction, solution, or thesis, antithesis, and then synthesis, which has something to do with the events that have taken place this past year and a half, as well as what's been going on for thousands of years. Also, I'll be talking about the attack on the light organ, which is very interesting. So this show may be a little longer than normal, but before I get into that material, I'd like to explain the saying I've been saying at the end of this show lately, which is, do no harm, defend truth, and keep transcending dogma. This is something I've been saying for the past 10 or so shows, and I've been seeing some people a little confused of its meaning. And if you've heard me say this phrase and aren't really sure what it means, let's start with the first part of that saying, which is, do no harm. And this is the sacred feminine non-aggression principle. It means to not violate another sentient being, to not aggress on the rights of others, which is part of aligning to natural law. This is part of understanding the right pillar of enlightenment, to do no harm or to not cause harm, which is simply a right action. And the second part of what I say is defend truth. And though this may sound ambiguous, it's 100% the truth when one understands the nature of truth itself, because truth means correct. It is right. It is right in nature. So to defend what is right is to defend truth. And this principle, this self-defense principle, goes way deeper than what most people are conscious of. And it ranges anywhere from something like defending yourself from a lie to defending your own human body. Because you're defending your inherent rights in nature. You're defending that which is right. When your rights are being violated, when your life is being violated or harm has been initiated upon your being, then you have the right, the inherent right, to defend yourself with force if need be. That's the truth. Therefore, you defend truth. It's self-defense. It's the right thing to do. Now, I think the last thing that I say is what some people may not really be understanding the most, which is when I say, and keep transcending dogma. So let's look at the word dogma. It comes from the Greek dogma, meaning opinion. Literally, what one thinks is true. It's a firmly established opinion. So dogma is the opposite of truth, but where truth itself can be discovered through hard research and diligence. Because in order to discover truth, we have to find the dogmas. We have to discover the lies. So becoming conscious of the lies and the deception. Dogma covers truth. It veils it. It veneers over it. But it's up to the individual to flesh out the dogmas, to observe, to learn, to discern, and to, overcome, which leads us to understanding the word transcend. And this word means to be able to, like I said, overcome, to triumph over the restrictive aspects of ourselves, including the lies, the misinformation, or simply the dogma. To transcend means to rise above and beyond the boundaries or limitations, the limitations that hold us back in consciousness, the deceptions, the lies. So to transcend dogma means to reach the dogma, to face it, to flesh it out, and then to understand it. So that way one can overcome it, move past it. But that doesn't mean leave it behind, because when we learn the truth, it's because we become conscious of the dogma, and we now know where the dogma is, which means we don't forget it. So why do I make it a point to say this? Well, the first thing I want to say is I'm not telling anyone what to do or what to think with their life, but I am simply giving a reminder that is what I see as triune in honest spirituality. I see this saying as holy in natural law because we align when we do the right thing and cause no harm, right? We align and do the right thing when we defend ourselves, rightfully so. And in order to grow and maintain doing the right thing, we must continue or keep harmonizing to these natural laws. We have to grow, we have to, what I'm saying is we ought to not stagnate once we learn these principles, because that's what happens. And those who have the hidden ancient wisdom, those who are holding occult knowledge from us, can still control us and keep our minds in chaos, at least to a degree, regardless of those principles that we know. I mean, yeah, the pillars of enlightenment are vital, but the way I see it is as long as we stay ignorant to the dogma or stagnate in dogma, we don't evolve, and we are still prone to domination. Self-defense goes a long way, and the more we transcend dogma, the more we are spiritually prepared for deceivers and egoic falsehoods. So do no harm, defend truth, and keep transcending dogma. So it's a reminder to not infringe on any other being's rights, defend what's inherently true and right in nature, and become conscious of and move past the deceptions that are stifling our evolution, which is part of our, collective evolution. So I hope that makes sense. It's a very, very powerful reminder or, motivation when one really sees its meaning for what it is and understands how it preserves truth. Okay, now, on the last show, I covered the triune brain, and I want to give a quick recap and do a little expansion on this topic because it's very, very important and it plays a critical role within the topic of chaos sorcery. The triune brain is a 3-in-1 brain. 3 smaller brains that work together in conjunction as one whole brain. So 2 lower animal brains holding up one upper human brain. The reptile and limbic brain holding up the neo or new brain, the cortical region of the brain that makes us human. And these brains correspond to consciousness, the way our mind operates with our thoughts, emotions, and our actions. When we become aware of how these brains operate, we become much more conscious of consciousness itself. We can then start to understand the symbolic nature of self. So the triune brain helps us understand consciousness symbolically. And I'm going to be very clear in saying that thinking symbolically is the part of consciousness that generates from the use of the tools of our imagination in conjunction with what we have gnosis of in order to see the parallels and correspondences within ourselves and around ourselves where we operate and function. The triune brain and triune consciousness can also be measured with the Vedic chakra system in the sense that the lower chakras correspond to the lower brain and the upper chakras correspond to the upper brain, and of course, everything in between. This symbolically helps us understand and become conscious of the symbolic nature of color frequency and sound frequency and organ function or position and organ purpose and the aspects associated with each organ from the bottom to the top within our body. An example would be that the root chakra can be associated with the R complex, not only in the color red, but in the sense that both are a part of us that have an inherent force to survive. The root chakra is the sex chakra, the driving force of the human genitals that co-creates life, which of course is also the survival mechanism. It's the same as our R complex. Both are corresponding to the base desires and low frequency, a low frequency in consciousness. Both areas cause blood to pump fast through the whole body, and it's no coincidence that blood is also red. And I don't have time to explain the whole chakra system on this show, but we definitely will cover that topic in the future. It's a topic that I feel is heavily misunderstood, and we'll do our best to explain it more in depth very soon. It's important when trying to understand the sacred symbolism together with consciousness. Okay, this next part is the last part of the method of manipulation. And I want to say that this part is a bit abstract because we really do have to understand causality and the effects that follow in order to grasp the relationship between the what, the who, the how, and especially the why. And I'm talking about chaos sorcery. And understanding the why is where we start to recognize a deeper understanding of causality. Chaos sorcery is the 14th and final method of manipulation that we're exploring here. So Mark Passio uses the phrase chaos sorcery, which is chaos, confusion, and opportunity. And David Icke and other researchers use the phrase problem, reaction, solution, which I feel more people are familiar with. But to really understand these phrases, we have to understand the philosophy of Johann Fichte and the widely known German philosopher Georg Hegel for the stages equivalent to problem, reaction, solution, which is thesis, antithesis, and then synthesis. So first, there's the thesis, which is the intellectual proposition, which is the problem. Then second is the antithesis, which is the negation of the proposition, the response to the thesis, the reaction to the problem. And then the synthesis, the resolution of tension between proposition and reaction. So the resolution, the solution, the firm decision to do something or to not do something. So thesis, antithesis, and then synthesis, or problem, reaction, solution. And this method is a device often used by the dark occult, aka the elite ruling class or the sorcerers. They create or manipulate an existing situation or problem, typically by major broadcasted events by the mainstream media, which then generates a desired outcry, which is the reaction by the people. And the reaction is the cry for help, mostly towards government to step in and, save and protect everyone, which then creates the solution, which is the authorities acting like the heroes with their, new coercive security measures. The social ruling elite manipulate and shape the opinions of the public through methodical propaganda with the intent of gaining approval for the implementation of more control. Mind control, that is. Initially, the dark occult, the dominators, covertly engineer and exploit a problem to legitimize the enactment of laws and mandates and restrictions. Then what happens is the problem or the problematic events are broadcasted and amplified through the media to popularize it, to gain the attention it needs to make people cry out strong social demands for action, which is the reaction. And this advances an acceptance of a predetermined solution, which most likely means more security, aka more government, aka, you guessed it, more enslavement. The process of problem, reaction, solution instigates social change. It legitimizes centralized power and increases hegemonic authority. The media is a propaganda weapon used to misinform the minds of the masses at all times. It's a massive militarized mind control weapon used to flood and steer society's minds with distractions, insignificant information, and, it creates non-reality representations of our world. Actually, think about it. When has any mainstream news source shared any news about any real freedom or empowering knowledge to help anyone, find their sovereignty or how to discover truth? Yeah, never. Just remember, the media is used to keep the focus of the people on an issue to evoke a strong audience for a preset solution. An example would be to manufacture an economic crisis in order to curtail social rights and reduce public services. And in this context, the problem produces an anxiousness from the public, which, motivates the support of people's consensus and overall support for the preordained solution. This method, known as chaos sorcery or problem reaction solution, is part of the divide and conquer strategy. The dominator ego sets up as executor, which seeks to divide the population in the mind because that's where most control resides. It seeks to divide and conquer and control everyone. It seeks to keep the aggregated mind divided and polarized in one dialectic or the other. And they only need the populace to buy into one dialectic for their plan to manifest.
Yeah, that's so true.
So,
man.
Why the phrase chaos sorcery? I believe I covered sorcery a bit in shows 17 and 18. And we have to remember that when talking about sorcery, we're also talking about magic and will. And magic itself can be used in dark, evil, egoic ways, or it can be used to bring light into the world. So it's the science and art of effecting change in accordance with the will. Light magic is in accord with the uppercase will, the higher will, the will that brings good into the world. It's the will of creation and consciousness expansion. It's the will that's not attempting to do something selfish, like a sorcerer would want or have done. And that's just what a sorcerer is, selfish. It's about ego-driven selfishness that uses magic in order to get what they want, even at the expense of others' lives. Chaos sorcery is basically the last-ditch effort of mind control madness to, instill fear into the masses as a powerful advantage strategy, especially over, most people's minds and hearts. If you can create a chaotic situation that people are unaware of, meaning not aware of the real causal factors and the real perpetrators, the real agents who generated the chaos, those people will react in fear as long as they are unaware, which is a perfect opportunity to move in with your control that you planned on implementing, the predetermined outcome. Just look at the past year and a half. There was an enormous panic generated by a chaotic event in the beginning of the year. A giant global panic. A panic over what was called the coronavirus. People lost their minds. It was pure chaos at the grocery stores, and the mainstream news caused so much of an alarm. They were drilling it into people's minds about how they could give the so-called virus to others without any symptoms. And this was a dirty, wicked black magic trick that was pulled on the masses, calling it asymptomatic. And for those who don't know, asymptomatic simply means of a condition or a person producing and showing no symptoms. And the mainstream news blasted this through the, government-owned scientist mouthpieces who alarm people of this completely fallacious nonsense, saying infected people or non-infected people can be the carrier and spread it even after, days of staying inside and never showing any signs of having it. Now, obviously, I'm no credentialed scientist, but there is absolutely no way to know who gave who what. There's no real way to know who was the carrier and who is not. Not unless everyone in the whole world was put in some lab and fully tested. It's just nonsense. It's to keep everyone in a perpetual fear loop and put into a hardcore controlled tattletale grid system. And that's what it is. That's what's happening. And this is what I would call the dark occultist's wet dream, because it got most people to buy into the censor mask, the distancing, the lockdowns, the legitimacy of government-funded scientists' opinions, the shots, and to make people turn on anyone questioning this event or, the authorities. People are so afraid to be around each other now. It's just really messed up. And I'm not going to go into too much more into this event on this show because, it's just not going to get us anywhere really. Maybe in future shows we'll cover a little bit more, but I'm just pointing out the behaviors in conjunction with the methods. That's what's important. This is all about the manipulation of consciousness. And that's what we should always keep in mind. The two aspects of consciousness that are heavily manipulated are our thoughts and emotions, which are manipulated into circular patterns that become very hard to escape. It becomes very hard to break out of this pattern if one doesn't have an understanding of these methods and doesn't sense the wrongdoings taking place. And this is another reason to really know and understand the triune brain. This is why there is an insane amount of cognitive dissonance regarding this event and many of the other devastating events in the past. And most of the time, the masses want to just, acquiesce and believe the mainstream narrative exactly the way it's told to them. So that way they, feel that they don't need to take any responsibility in the matter. It's the mentality, don't question, just trust the government and their scientists. They would never hurt us. They care about our safety.
Huh.
And this is just a cyclical pattern of cognitive dissonance where one's mind is trapped in between the R complex part of the brain, where fear is in control, and the limbic brain, where one is docile and submissive to man's authority, where emotions do all the thinking, the illogical thinking. And this means consciousness isn't operating in the neocortex where one can think critically. And without critical thought and being ruled by the lower brains, it becomes harder to escape the cognitive dissonance. And the dominators are counting on it. They are drooling and patiently waiting on the opportunity to implement their predetermined solution. And you can bet on that. Then there's the synthetic solution to the conflicts that the dialectic creates, which is, which can't be introduced unless those being manipulated take a side that would then advance the predetermined agenda. So there needs to be a response from the people to say that something needs to be done. And this is where we become polarized. It's the us versus them mentality, just like what happened after 9/11. We went, right off to war with a country that had nothing to do with that event. At least not from what the mainstream media shared with us.
Ooh.
And this division continues. We fight amongst ourselves, while the dominator psychopaths keep getting away with everything that they're getting away with while we stay dormant. And as long as we collectively stay in this level of consciousness, we will continue to see things as us versus them. And examples would be, like the masked versus the unmasked or the anti-masked. Vaxxed versus unvaxxed, military versus civilian, police officer versus the general public, the left versus the right, the Republican versus the Democrat, the conservative versus the liberal, male versus female, young versus old, Muslim versus Christian, poor versus rich, and so on and so forth. And What we really need to do is become conscious enough to shed this low level of duality and wake up to the fact that we are all in the same situation with each other. And we're, quickly losing our freedoms as a result of this, nasty manipulation. I'm going to read this quote by General Douglas MacArthur. Our government has kept us in a perpetual state of fear, kept us in a continuous stampede of patriotic fervor, with the cry of grave national emergency. Always there has been some terrible evil to gobble us up if we did not blindly rally behind it by furnishing the exorbitant sums demanded. Yet in retrospect, these disasters seem to have never happened, seem never to have been quite real. Not quite real as in, ordering a lockdown for over a year for a pandemic with a survival rate of nearly 99.9% worldwide. It's the type of nonsense where one person is stabbed by someone with a fork, and now the whole city needs to turn, their forks over to the authorities. Yeah, it's pretty much that stupid. It's all about fear. And chaos sorcery is completely fear-based.
It, everybody.
So you can create the chaos, the problem, or, the threat to the personal and societal well-being. Then wait for the confusion and reaction on the part of the general public, and then express concern for the potential victims. And then as the opportunity arises, impose the predetermined solution by insisting that the citizens are in need of protection. And this is the exact process of the Hegelian dialectic. Because the problem has to be chaotic in nature, and it has to be, something that instills fear and causes the reaction that you're looking for, which has to be based in confusion, which is the state of internal anarchy, meaning, the person who is experiencing this reaction of confusion is not in control of their own thoughts and emotions. They're not ruling the kingdom of self. And in that state, their behavior can be manipulated from other sources outside of themselves. They are open to manipulation if they're in the internal state of anarchy, which is confusion. And this is what 9/11 produced. And this is also what the corona pandemic produced. All done with a huge injection of fear into the consciousness of the general public. And then finally, that is the opportunity.
What?
And because that state of low reptile consciousness that the masses were held in, they were held in a level of thrall in those events. They are ripe for the opportunity of the dark occultists, the sorcerers, to step in and propose all their solutions, their quote-unquote solutions for the exchange of their freedoms. The corona pandemic was a catalyst for the control that they, couldn't achieve otherwise. International banker David Rockefeller said, "We are on the verge of global transformation.
What?
All we need is the right
What?
major crisis, and the nation will accept the new world order."
Well,
And that crisis, in my opinion, was not just one, but multiple. And there could be more to come very soon. And I mean, they don't even hide this part of the agenda anymore with their taunts of, what the globalists refer to as the Great Reset, aka New World Order. And this is about government becoming king of the world. And you can pretty much bet that all major events that have happened in our history were manipulated with the Hegelian dialectic. One of the phrases you'll hear about most when it comes to the Hegelian dialectic, recognized as being used, is a false flag. And a false flag, or black flag, describes covert military or paramilitary operations designed to deceive in such a way that the operations appear as though they are being carried out by entities, groups, or nations other than those who actually planned and executed them. Operations carried out during peacetime by civilian organizations, as well as covert government agencies, may by extension be called false flag operations if they seek to hide the real organization behind an operation. And one of the basic methodologies of a false flag is to hold a drill and take the drill live. So if you want to know about a drill that was most likely taken live in all of 2020, was that of the event 201. So go look that up and study it if you haven't already. See, the Hegelian dialectic for the corona pandemic was very layered. I mean, you could probably write like 50 books on how much has been done during this event. Probably more than that, but for the sake of giving a simple example, would be the chaos hysteria generated by the mainstream media of this so-called rapidly spreading deadly virus with inflated numbers and causing more fear by the supposedly flooded hospitals shutting everything down, which, then created so much panic and confusion. People were, stocking up on toilet paper and groceries, not knowing what to do other than huddle up in their homes, separated from other, loved ones, out of fear of catching the corona while listening to the mainstream news for instructions on what to do next.
Yup.
And this confusion lasted for a long time as people were heavily restricted from going anywhere and being around others. This confusion, whether people know this or not, began to break their will. They became used to being confused and being told what to do. Their consciousness was held mostly in the R complex, survival mode, pure survival mode. So no critical thinking by most. And I mean, let me tell you, I was in San Diego, California at that time, and I felt like I was the only angry critical thinker rather than, being in fear and confusion like the rest. And, it was a very lonely place to be. But, sadly, just about everyone I knew and saw was willfully obedient with the way things were. It was complete insanity. And it still is. I mean, the dark occult really did a fantastic magic trick by physically exposing the collective sleepers through the willful mask wearers and who willfully got the shots, without any real research. And they actually call those sleepers the dead. Think about that. Now, I'd assume anyone listening knows what the solution was and is. And that is our quote-unquote hero government granting the populace, stimulus money. Plus, COVID unemployment and highly expedient experimental shots to be able to, grant the quote-unquote normal back to the, public life. And now people are, feeling safer. I mean, the mind control is strong, very strong. It is layers and layers strong, and all just, willfully being ignored. Can you imagine all that has happened and never attempt to question it, or do any deep research to know any other factors of how or why it was done the way that it was, or how, how the whole situation was handled. It's just crazy. And regardless of the way I feel about all that, I want to make it a point to say that I completely believe that many people lost their lives during this whole pandemic event. Now, whether they all died from what we were all told they died from or not, or how many died or not, it just sucks anytime anyone has to suffer and be caught up in the crossfire of any manipulated event. I'm not just some heartless conspiracy theorist who, wants attention. I'm someone who cares for truth. I want to know what's really going on. And I would think, more people would want to know that. And more people should want to know. And more people who know the truth of what's going on should be speaking out about this. Now, I kind of wrestled with whether I wanted to share this next part of the show. I'm going to switch gears a little, and I'm not going to go too deep into it, but I just wanted to explore and share something really interesting, some really interesting correspondences to our breath, to our air, our lungs, and the spirit, along with what's, being done to us and has been for a long time. And this has something to do with, something deeper that's been going on for thousands of years up until now, especially with this, pandemic event. Definitely a pattern that is literally and symbolically affecting our lungs. So what are our lungs, really? It's our organ that inhales air or oxygen, right? It's our breath of life organ. The actual etymology of the word lung is the light organ. Now think about that. The light organ. Light because air is seemingly light and weight, right? It doesn't weigh anything. The air we inhale and exhale is literally an inhale and exhale of the whole universe. It's like a microcosmic exchange of life with the macrocosmic lung of the world and the universe. But why else is it light? Because it inhales life, and life is light. Light brings life to everything. The sun is light. Raising consciousness symbolically represents light. The archetypal Jesus walks on water because he's symbolically raised conscious light. Light is what we use to see with, literally and symbolically or spiritually. Light is also looked at as a sense, like a sixth sense. To have light or knowledge of something is to be able to make sense of something. To smell is part of breathing, and to smell is to have a scent, to smell or sense something. To knock a dog off his trail is to throw off his scent by tricking him with another scent. Or knock off a detective by throwing off the scent in his research so he won't discover the truth. Or, it'll make it harder anyway. So we can see this connection with meaning of the words and the way we use them, right? We can see the deeper purpose of the words, why a word like light can mean, something like weight or consciousness or life force. And then, see why that is, what the connection is between them. The reason I'm explaining this is because these aspects, such as lungs, light, air, spirit, and breathing, are all very important to being alive and raised in consciousness. They are all deeply interwoven and connected. Everything is connected. And the dark occult, slave master dominators of this world don't want us to have those things fully functioning or connected in our minds. And, they don't want us to really be alive and fully raised because we'll become a problem for their power structure. Plus, they hate light. It hurts their eyes, or eye. They're like vampires. They create and manipulate fabricated events to throw us off, throw off our scent. Because as long as these events cause confusion and fear, most people won't try to understand what's happening to them because their scent has been knocked off. And of course, the bigger problem, which is the worship of authority. And that's really knocking people off from the truth. So let's look at some ways they've been manipulating, suffocating, mocking, cutting us off from, and regulating our light and breath, cutting us off from truth. Some well-known ways they do it is burning oil pollution, chemical plants, oil spills, concrete, chopping down tons of unnecessary oxygen-giving trees. And then there's, some other kind of known ways like geoengineering, where the sun is being dimmed. It's being blocked out. And, deadly metals like, when they're geoengineering, the airplanes are dropping heavy metals like strontium, aluminum, and barium. They're being dropped on us. And, we're inhaling that into our blood and then depriving oxygen from the blood with 5G technology. Or the highly likelihood of the Amazon forest intentionally set on fire partially to weaken the oxygen level of the major parts of Earth, which affects us. It affects our lungs. There were 3 major forests on fire within the same year or so in Brazil and Australia and Southern Africa. And the Amazon rainforest is actually known as the lungs of the planet. Now think about that. And they were all on fire right before this pandemic event. And what was the big symptom everyone was so afraid of about the coronavirus? Lung problems, right? Respiratory failure, right? And what were so many censored nurses and doctors saying about the ventilator machines used for all the patients who supposedly had that virus? Their lungs were being crushed and many became fatal. They were starved for oxygen and nobody was doing anything about it. No mainstream news concerns at all. And what were most people wearing for over a whole year? Masks. Surgical masks, to be exact. And those masks do what? They cover your mouth and nose, the areas where you breathe, the areas where you speak, the areas where you eat. They cut off a certain amount of oxygen to our lungs. Those masks do. And believe it or not, there are many people who argue that they have no problem breathing in those things. Again, cognitive dissonance. But the point is, those masks absolutely do restrict an important amount of oxygen to the lungs and brain. And then another event shortly after the start of the pandemic, which was also heavily manipulated, was the public execution of George Floyd, where the police officer put his knee onto the neck of George, restricting his air flow until he died. He suffocated and died. Let's not forget about Eric Garner having his air pipe closed off as well by a police officer. You know? Think about it. And that was a public execution.
R.I.P. to those guys.
And then following that execution of George Floyd, there were lots of protests with people wearing shirts that say, "I can't breathe," while wearing a mask. Now you want to talk about being mocked or, being just plain blind to the way that looks, it's just a complete contradiction and cognitive dissonance. The way I'm seeing this is it's all to destroy the sacred feminine conspiracy. And what I mean by this is when we understand that the etymology of the term conspiracy means, breathe together in spirit, then we understand there is a war on spirit and anything associated with it, like breath or light of consciousness. We understand that the material Wested mind is at war with spirit. And society is taught to hate and reject conspiracy theorists or anyone who questions the authorities. They're a nuisance to the control system. And anyone who has really dug deep enough in history and the occult knows there's a war on the sacred feminine, and the sacred feminine is the air, the breath, the lungs, the spirit, and so much more. So this is a war on nature herself. And there's so much more to all this. And perhaps I'll elaborate more in later shows. And here's a topic I also hope we can explore further on this podcast, which is animism. And I'm only bringing this up to further my point about the breath and spirit. From an anthropological approach, animism is the belief that everything possesses a soul. And that is, it is also applied to the non-living objects and natural phenomenon that also have a soul and therefore possess a, supernatural or natural power. Ancient religions would make offerings to objects such as an ancient statue and believe that they were able to pass a part of their soul into the statues as a way to make an offering to the spiritual entities residing in the objects. For instance, a person would create pottery or forge a weapon, and those objects would, contain the spiritual essence of that person, part of the soul of that person. So part of that soul of that person was imbued within the object. In the past, the objects were important in a spiritual perspective. They contained the essence of the soul, which is why in many ancient burials, a lot of the material culture was, buried with the people. It was, the importance of the material, the objects, what was real, what was, made by us in this world and could be offered to the spirits as they, can't, make physical things of their own. People offered their own essence placed within the objects, and this is animism. Everything has a spiritual essence and or spiritual entities. So the point I'd like to make is there are so many statues missing their noses. And this was definitely deliberate as far as I'm concerned. And people will say it was, age and weather, which could be the case for some, sure, but that argument holds no real weight when, we actually look at how many statues are noseless and how other features are mostly still intact. Those statues are symbols and a part of our heritage. So how do you, knock a detective off his trail to truth? You knock off his scent, right? And that's what I believe this symbolically represents. Whether we believe in animism and, they hold souls or not, the action of removing a nose is to knock off the scent, to symbolically cut us off from a certain part of our heritage or origins, so we have a harder time discovering truth. And again, there's a lot more to this topic, but I'm just trying to correlate the attack on our lungs, our light, literally and symbolically. And I'm going to go ahead and finish with this quote by American scientist David Bohm. The field of the finite is all that we can see, hear, touch, remember, and describe. This field is basically that which is manifest or tangible. The essential quality of the infinite, by contrast, is its subtlety, its intangibility. This quality is conveyed in the word spirit, whose root meaning is wind or breath. This suggests an invisible but pervasive energy to which the manifest world of the finite responds. This energy or spirit infuses all living beings, and without it, any organism must fall apart into its constituent elements. That which is truly alive in the living being is this energy of spirit, and this is never born and never dies.
Wee.
And I'm going to go ahead and end this show with that really powerful quote by David Bohm.
Synchronicity.
All right. Hope you found clarity and value in this show today. And you can find more shows, presentations, and news at CubbyWhole.com. Also, please make sure to keep your eyes out for the next shows. And if you have any questions regarding the topics for these shows, please email us at CubbyWhole@mail.com.
Hey.
That's CubbyWhole@mail.com. Also, any donations are appreciated, as anything that's given will go directly to the CubbyWhole website. Just hit the donation button on the website, and it's set up pretty easy to operate from there. And I want to thank those who have donated so far. It's very, very much appreciated.
Heads up.
Okay, I'm your host, Nate Cap. Thank you for listening, and remember, do no harm, defend truth, and keep transcending dogma.
Yes, sir. All right. That was an amazing episode. Of course, right when the episode is over, this dude wants to have a conversation right when I'm ready to end the recording. But that was an amazing episode. I'm so glad the game didn't crash this time. That was awesome, so I don't have to re-listen to the entire episode again. Man, he hit on so many good topics. I don't even know where to begin. I mean, I hope you guys are studying this information, really listening to it and understanding it. And then once you hear these episodes, like what Mark Passio says, and they say on this podcast multiple times, don't hear what they say and take their word for it. Don't believe it. Go down these rabbit holes. Start studying this stuff. Study the trivium, right? Study the Hegelian dialectic. If this is your first time hearing about the Hegelian dialectic, you need to shut this off and go study it right now. Go do some Wikipedia, go research some articles, go learn what the Hegelian dialectic is, because it is so important. Go learn what, I forget his name, who created it. His name was Hegel, something Hegel was his name, who developed that method of thinking. Yeah, go study these topics. Go down these rabbit holes. Go down these avenues. Do your own work and do your own due diligence. DIY, that's the real punk rock right there. Do it yourself, man. Study this stuff. Read books, read the Trivium, get yourself a copy of the Trivium, even if you don't plan on reading the entire thing. If you read one chapter out of the book of the Trivium, you're getting your worth out of it. Like, just study. PS5 is gonna shut the recording down, so I gotta end it. Thank you for made it this far, everybody, and keep studying. Stay tuned and stay golden. Thank you so much if you made it this far.